Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. A big shout out to Red Cloud. We've got a great guest today on Digging Deeper. We're going to be speaking with Evie Nickel, and we've got Sean Samson, who's the president, CEO, and director of the company on. But we also have Paul Davis, who's the VP Exploration. This is going to be a great chat. We get to hear about their project, but nickel's in the news a lot, not only because of political insecurity in Russia and the war in Ukraine. We've talked about this before, but we have a lot to unravel here and why nickel has such a key component and opportunity for Canada, for the sector. We're looking forward to getting into this project. Sean, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. I had a chance to speak to you a little bit yesterday, and definitely excited about what you guys are up to here. It's an excellent opportunity for people to listen to. Tell me a little bit about the macro of nickel, the idea of the company, and where you are today, a bit of a snapshot.
Yeah, thanks. So macro, you touched on it, right? It's a great time for nickel, wherein nickel currently is the vast majority is used for stainless steel. So the world's nickel seems to head to China to make stainless steel and then come back to our Walmarts in the form of frying pans and such. Now we've got a new demand category where nickel is one of the key components of the electric vehicle batteries. As those batteries are playing with their chemistries, trying to figure out what the best energy density of the batteries are, nickel continues to be a key component of most of the winning battery chemistries. So what that means is you have this global supply-demand balance, which has been set for years to fuel stainless steel, and that continues to grow at a few percent a year. And then you ratchet on top of that a whole new demand category, which comes from the electric vehicle batteries. So it's very exciting for someone like our company, which is sitting on a lot of nickel in the ground. What we are is a Toronto-based base metals company, and we have a huge land position just south of Timmins, Ontario. So 1 hour flight north from Toronto. That's where we have our known mineralization and a bunch of exploration targets. And Evie Nickel is advancing on a 2-track strategy where we have across our land package, you see there on the screen, high-grade mineralization in the southern part of our land, specifically with the W4 zone, which is a 1% grade near-surface deposit. That was a 2010 resource, which was just under 700,000 tons at 1%. In the northeast of our property, you have what our second track, we refer to it as our large scale. That's up on what's called the Lang deposit. We drilled that this summer, and we have these 2 tracks. We have the high grade in the south, focused around the W4 zone. We've applied for our mining lease on that one. And very interestingly, there's a permitted operating concentrator. There's a plant 7 kilometers away from that deposit. So that high grade business anchored from the W4, which we've drilled, and we'll talk a bit about how we think there's a lot more nickel on that one. That is a very interesting production story that could be producing nickel in the next 3-4 years. Then we have our second track, which is an enormous large-scale target, the Lang, which we drilled this summer, and we're going to have news out on pretty soon. So that's our W4 you've got up on the screen there, Andrew. I'm going to hand off to Paul Davis, my partner on this. Paul, my VP of Exploration, spent many years of his life living up in Timmins and knows these deposits very well because for years he was the guy in the gold camp, Timmins, looking for nickel. So Paul, why don't you talk us through sort of the high-grade W4 and what we found with this W4 extension?
Sure, that sounds good, Sean. Yeah, I know I spent a career looking for nickel in a gold camp, which is a bit of a different... But I also, during my time there, we discovered 6 new zones of nickel mineralization in Komatiates, as well as moved ahead and permitted 1 through to production and worked on 2 other permits. So we have experience also moving projects ahead. Now, W4 is unique in that the sulfides are made entirely of pentlandite. So you can get a really high-grade con potentially out of this deposit. So when we got it, we drilled a few holes in the upper part, which you can see. And then our phase 2 program really was to define and see where the deposit goes at depth. So we walked across, we drilled it from the north, which gives us a much better angle hitting the mineralization. So the more you are at a 90-degree angle, the better it is. And we had some very impressive results from the down plunge drilling, which really shows to us that this mineralization continues at depth. The resource was based on the first 200 meters, which was 670,000 tons, about 1% nickel. What we're seeing is potentially another mirror of that, possibly a little better, maybe about the same. But one of the big things that came out of this was the original resource estimate had 3 separate lenses. So it had a lens that went down to about 200 meters, and then it looked like it broke apart. It was a small lens, and then there was another small lens below. Our drilling, I'm confident that we've confirmed that this is actually a single zone along the basal contact of this one flow, and that so it's not scattered apart, which makes it difficult for modeling and or extraction when you get there, but it's actually one single zone. So it should result in more tons and a better grade continuity than what we saw in any original preliminary historic resource that was done in 2010.
Now, can I ask you this? Is that you're saying that this resource on this is the first 200 meters? So we're talking very shallow. Right. Now, you've probably experienced, of course, up in Timmins, these gold veins. Now I'm just the gold. They can go down for kilometers, so they can go down quite low. Were you seeing a lot of the nickel going down as far deep as well? Like, what I'm getting at is you've only done 200 meters. There's a good chance there's a lots more, or potentially lots more, further down.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. It is the style of deposit lends itself to having these long-lived systems. And I'll use the Redstone mine, which is where the mill is that processes this 7 kilometers away. They've identified mineralization down to about 1,200 meters.
Okay, yeah.
So, it just keeps trucking.
So that's why, yeah, I wanted to get that because 200 meters is very shallow, and just to see that you were able to produce the high grade, the results so far at that, I wanted people to kind of get a sense that they're really scratching the surface, not to be cliche.
But then in terms of surface, so Paul mentioned we had the historic resource down to 200.
Yeah.
We found this extension between 200 and 400 meter depth. The Shaw Dome lights right up. So we anticipate that there's a lot more near surface, so within 500 meters, high grade stuff. So it gives us options, right? We can either continue to chase that mineralization deeper, or we can move a little bit to the east and try to go further down trend, because it's really interesting where we are. There's been historic production in the past on the Shaw Dome area, but it was always peaks and troughs. So they were producing when the nickel price was high. Nobody properly explored to figure out a future. So what you're seeing there is sort of a nice output from technical analysis Paul and the team's doing with all of the historical data. So Paul, do you want to walk us through sort of what excites you about the high grade potential around the Shaw Dome?
For sure. Like the Shaw Dome, you have to think of it as a layer cake that you've kind of bent around or domed up. And so you get these layers around the outside. And you can see that here in this 3D mag image. Your komatiite rocks, or the ones that are more prospective for hosting these high-grade nickel things, show up as your bright oranges and reds because they're high mag. And so you can see the circular kind of dome-type structure. And what we have in the Shaw Dome is really about 4 separate horizons within these flows that host the high-grade nickel mineralization. W4, being ours, is in the uppermost 4th zone. And there we probably have 30 kilometers of strike length of favorable stratigraphy just to test on that particular horizon. And then we have 3 additional horizons adding upwards of another 70 kilometers of prospective targets within the Shaw Dome.
So we're just getting started now with this exploration. I think that now that we've bolted together this enormous land package, there's a huge amount of potential for us to find more and more high-grade mineralization. So we could chase W4 deeper, or we'll find the next W4 or better around the Shaw Dome and put together a business with high-grade mineralization for which the existing plant there could continue to be fed and be producing. It's analogous. Paul, do you want to talk a bit about the Kambalda in Western Australia?
Yeah, I was going to say that'd be a great slide to bring up now because it's analogous to what we see. So that picture on the right is actually the Kambalda Dome in Western Australia, which produced about 52 million tons of nickel at about 2%.
Okay.
So it's a big nickel area. And then the little square box on the one on the left, the dashed line, is the same aerial extent on the Shaw Dome. Now, Kambalda, what happens is once you find one nickel deposit along a certain horizon, your chances of finding another one go up exponentially. And these deposits tend to occur in clusters.
Okay.
You find one in a restricted area, you find more. And so I think when you take a look at the map of the Shaw Dome, you can see the distribution here, and those are actual nickel mines or deposits that are occurring in the Shaw Dome, that we see this clustering effect. We also see these horizons that have a higher prospectivity.
So that's our high grade business. Like, we think that we know about one deposit. We think there's a lot more there. And from my perspective, drilling's expensive, and when we're drilling, it's great to be drilling in a place that all the other data tells us there's going to be something there, and it's hugely prospective. Like, one of our biggest challenges, Andrew, is trying to prioritize our targets when I think about this high grade business across the southern part of the Shaw Dome. So that's our first track.
Yes.
We've got this other track going as well, which we have an enormous high, we call it large scale, but it's low grade target in our northeast. We drilled that off this summer, and that's our news for the next 2 or 3 months. That's the Car Lang. So this is near surface mineralization, very near surface, to the point that we have outcrop, and we think it's going to be less than 10 meters of overburden down to the mineralization. And it's a 10 kilometer long trend. Paul, do you want to talk a bit about the Car Lang for us?
Sure. Like, the Car Lang, basically, this is the third time I've been in this area. I worked here with Outokumpu back in the mid-90s and actually drilled a couple of holes into it. So I had a bit of a head start on knowing what was there. And the OGS did a big mapping program and identified these dunites, which we had known were there in outcrop along these trends. And that's that purple color you see on the map. Those are actually dunitic komatiites, which are analogous to what you're seeing in these other deposits around the Timmins area that are being expressed by other companies. We focused in on a 1.4 kilometer section. We drilled it on a 200 meter line spacing after talking to our arm's length third party who's going to do our preliminary resource estimate on it, to make sure that we could move this all into kind of an indicated category. So we completed the lines, and basically what we're seeing is what's expected on that map there, a dunite that covers anywhere between about 400 to 500 meters of thickness, and just basically it's dull, boring rock with nickel throughout.
So it's this large scale target with the lower grade. It's really interesting because Paul drilled up there in his former life with Outokumpu, and they were always, Paul, you're always looking for 0.6, right? Which was the Mount Keith in Australia, which at the time was thought to be sort of the lowest cutoff grade. But now in this new nickel market, while companies are marketing much lower grade deposits, we know we have an enormous one up there in terms of mineralization. So we drilled that off this summer. This is going to be our news, the assays for the next 2 or 3 months. And as Paul mentioned, we're going to put up a resource, we hope, at the beginning of next year, which will be a very big number, but it'll still just be 15% of the 10K that we have of this very similar mineralization. So, Andrew, those are our 2 tracks. We've got the high-grade business that we're applying for our mining lease. We know about this relatively near-surface mineralization. We're hoping to pull in more into our resource next year. And as we showed you, that's just the beginning of the high grade. So that's track 1. Track 2 is this company's option, wherein we have, and we'll start talking about this with our assays, we have an enormous deposit up there. And when we begin to compare it to other nickel juniors, it's very interesting. We compare very favorably with companies that have just high grade or just the large scale. We have the combination, and we're still much cheaper. So you want to maybe throw up that comp slide?
Yeah, let's look at that comparable slide near the end, because you guys have cash. You're a $7 million market cap. If you wanted to take a look at like valuation of company, and I just kind of reiterate that because it's I think 45 million shares out, give or take.
Yep.
And it goes without saying, a 7 million market cap company that has good news is a lot easier to move than Tesla moving from 800 or 1,000 to 2,000. You can add value, and we like to call it asymmetric gains, when in a situation like this, rather than if you've already had massive growth.
Absolutely. And we've got a few names there on that slide.
Yep.
We think we stack up very nicely. The high grade one, starting on the left, class one, Paul actually discovered the large zone as part of their deposit. Our view of that company is they are pretty much done in exploration and finding more nickel on that high grade project. They have a resource that's currently 2 times ours, but they're valued 3 times us.
Okay.
And we're just getting started on that high grade. And then there's these other companies, 2 of them we have listed on the slide here, that are ahead of us in terms of timeline, but really what they're marketing is more of this low grade mineralization that has not yet proven to be economic. We have 10 kilometers of the stuff.
Yes.
And again, we'll start talking about 15% of it that we drilled with assay results over the next couple months. So the financial market has put a value on what those types of resources are worth. And I'm pretty confident in saying we don't have that value in our stock right now.
No.
So there's that. Then there's Tamarack, which is a nice high grade deposit that Talon has in Minnesota. And the important part is the Minnesota part. So it's very difficult for them to get permitted where they are. I feel like we have similar mineralization someplace on our property, great high grade like Tamarack. And I'll tell you, if I discover that a half-hour drive south from Timmins, I'm much more confident that we can get that permitted and up and running versus the guys with Talon. So we're deeply undervalued. I know every junior company says that, but the numbers really back this one up, especially with the 2-track strategy. And I think we represent deep value at this point.
Yeah, and maybe I'll ask you this because everyone hears about lithium, and there's tons of lithium companies, and there's lots of good ones. So there's lots of opportunities, and there's lots of companies to talk about. Nickel, not as much, but Canada has a good place that it's known for nickel. Yeah. It doesn't hurt. I mean, not to bring up bad, chaotic environments, but with Norilsk is basically off the table. I mean, the relations with Russia, even if they were magically to get better tomorrow, trust is broken. There's going to be sanctions. There's going to be issues moving forward. So now I'm going to say urgency in the sense that there can be speed, urgency in mining, which sounds kind of, it's a long time frame, but there is some urgency for finding nickel projects that can be developed that are economic in a timely fashion, I would say. What's your opinion? Do you think that that's fair to say?
No, that's absolutely the case. And I see that in my travels and in our continued meetings with the car companies and the battery companies that are working with the car companies. It's very interesting to hear them talk about their plans for rolling out the gigafactories, the speed with which they're able to build those factories. But, and the numbers all vary, of course, but every one of those factories requires a lithium mine and a nickel mine or 2.
Yeah.
And we're on different timelines. It takes them 2.5, 3 years to build the last plant, Tesla, outside Berlin. To get a mine up and running, folks like Paul need to go look at 10, 15,000 different targets to find mineralization. And then once you know the deposit, it takes 10 years to get that into production.
Yeah.
And all the governments are aligned right now. So let's say we cut that 10 years into half to 5. You still don't know where the deposits are to make those mines. So it doesn't add up. Something's got to budge. And it's likely a combination of, nickel price to incent more people towards the nickel business. There's likely things to be done on the chemistry side where you're seeing it. We've already seen it with cobalt, although cobalt's got a lot more hair on it with the ESG.
Yes.
But the reality is when you talk to these, especially the European buyers, when they look at the world's biggest nickel producers, you've got top of the list, Indonesia, number 2, Russia. Russia's off the board because of Ukraine, and then Canada, Australia. But the dilemma for them, and they see it and they talk about it, is behind the Indonesian production is Chinese money.
Yes.
If Taiwan heats up, and I'm just a simple miner, but if Taiwan heats up and puts the Indonesian production off the board, then it really hurts the Europeans. And then you've got US plans for gigafactories and wonderfully supportive legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, which is meant to incent and move along the EV market in the US, but they put up protectionist walls by saying the inputs to those vehicles need to come from the US. The great thing is they broadened the definition of the US by including Canada and Australia and South Korea in it, but the math doesn't add up. So you're correct. The geology of nickel around the world, there are far fewer deposits. And as a result, there's less deposits known, less deposits being advanced, and it's not clear where this supply is going to come from. But what's certainly happening are the car companies are barreling ahead with their plans, and I think that's actually going to change the titch as well. But they're moving ahead with these plans to build more and more demand, and yet the supply is not there. So to sum it up, it's a great place to be, and I'm feeling more and more confident about this. It's when I have these conversations with the new demand. So it's a great place to be sitting on a lot of nickel, and I'm really excited to have the two tracks. The near-term high grade that we're moving along and permitting towards potential production for 3 to 4 years out, and then this option on the large scale, which is an enormous trend, and really could be something to it.
Yeah, that blue sky potential. Everyone likes to have that because you're fulfilling a need, but also that kind of how long can this go for? I mean, if this is economic and moves forward. And we just saw, 2 months ago, I mean, the German delegation, the chancellor was over, brought along Daimler-Benz, and who else came along? Volkswagen.
Yep.
And they were talking hydrogen, but they made a specific point of saying they were talking to mining companies. They wanted minerals. There's always mention of Elon Musk, rumors, him and Han looking in Canada. To me, it makes sense. I mean, we've got a wealth of resource and riches here. We have infrastructure already. The U.S. is a bit tighter on getting permits and getting things done. I mean, I think they're opening a little bit, but we have a tradition here. We have framework in mind. I've heard lawyers talk about our ESG was ESG before ESG was there. Like we have a framework that's very, very positive. We just kind of need the all hands on deck from whether government media on to kind of set our path, because I think Canada has a really strong chance to be a global leader if we're given kind of the green light. And it's projects like this that have infrastructure. They have the capacity to refine the metal, to get it to a user. All of these things, let's assume there's the metallurgy and everything else, but all these things matter. And that distinction between length of project, high grade, low grade, all that. This looks quite favorable if someone was to come in and look to see, we want to do a gigafactory or something of that nature in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And also, go ahead.
The levels of government with whom we're constantly meeting, the feds in the province with Ontario, are completely aligned on this, and they are immensely supportive. So you mentioned the meetings with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. We followed that up. I had meetings in Germany with the car companies and in Europe, and we're headed back over in another month's time. So I'll tell you, the car companies, they've really changed their tune. And what happened in the spring with Russia has really shaken them. So yes, they're going well up the supply chain to try to secure their metal.
Now, let me ask you this as kind of a sort of a side topic, and we're talking, speculation here, but I've asked a couple other viewers, is getting people, retail, interested in the mining sector is often challenging. But do you think that there's a point in which, you're talking to car companies where the end user just kind of bypasses everyone, just comes to a mine and says, listen, like Ford did with Lake for lithium, where they just go, listen, we want the end use of your product. We'll fund you. We'll do, instead of it being a family office mining fund or XYZ, we're an end user. We're going to need this. It's kind of like a futures agreement. We'll come in and do some sort of memo of understanding for X percent. Do you think could that be the future of how to grow this sector without having to constantly look for retail funds or retail money?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So something needs to be thought of differently, right? That's one of the themes of this discussion, is that the numbers don't add up with the current model. Yeah. And the car companies, I've heard them say that verbatim. So again, they're looking further and further up the supply chain to try to sort out their supply chain. So it will take a basket of investment types.
Yeah.
I think you'll see not just the traditional ways that Canadian juniors have bootstrapped and financed mines in their development. I think you're going to see new participants. Those include the car companies, the battery companies working with the car companies. It will also include government because this is becoming a very strategic thing.
Yes.
So yes, long answer to your short question. There will be a new model with new participants. And we're speaking with all of those participants because we're not just doing the usual 30 years ago, let's advance a project going back to the same well. That's not the case at all because this has a lot of participants that are all very heavily incented to ensure that new supply comes on.
And believe me, my whole job I find is to try to reach out to mom, pond, or retail, and that isn't to dissuade you. That should be further like encouragement that listen, if the big players are trying to find a way, because this is part of the problem. If someone now you've got an early like Shell and company where you could take in a lot of money, but a lot of these companies, if they take in a $50 million, $100 million investment, if it was needed. You know, that does a lot to their shell structure. So there has to be new, like you're saying, creative ways. This is a good time, even especially in chaotic times, if someone can be diligent to look to see what are the projects, who are the teams that can deliver, and I can get value, and which is the one that could give me the biggest bang for the buck. And at 7 million market cap with the projects you have, with infrastructure, everything else, I can't tell the future, but it certainly looks like a very interesting project.
Yeah, and that's our view as well. So I'm a bit of a stoic on this. I focus on the thing I can focus on, the things which are using the money investors have given me to advance our assets along as best we can, and telling our story as broadly as I can, both with the investment community, in addition to these other market participants and governments. So we're doing that. And we're hitting it on both those areas. The market valuation and the fact we trade at 7 million equity, that I hope will change as we're piling up as many things as we can on the asset side. But right now, especially for new names coming to look at the story, it represents deep value.
And you've got, do you have like 3 million in cash still? You've still got
a little under.
A little under 3, okay.
Yep.
So you're basically cashed up. You've got news flow. You're going to have some news coming out in the next weeks, months.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I don't think that the option value of our large-scale deposit has at all been recognized in the stock.
Yes.
It's tough to say what contributes to the 7 million equity value, but charitably, I think that will be new news to people. And we're done the drilling, and it's all going to be coming out over the next 2-3 months. So it's a wonderful opportunity for new investors looking at the name.
Well, that's why I want that sense of urgency. There's going to be results. There's lots of work to be done. But also, I mean, we try to uncover value. That's my whole job, is trying to uncover value in the sector. And if you believe that the future is going to be electric cars, you see that there's a definite desire to shift energy sources, which I think at this point is pretty self-explanatory and not new news for anyone. Nickel is one of those ones that people don't pay as much attention to and should. And this, we're looking forward to catching up with you again as soon as there's results out and following up to see how things are progressing.
Super.
Really appreciate both Paul and Sean. I really appreciate the story. Evie, Nickel, take a look at everyone and reach out to me if you've got any questions, and be happy to connect you with them.
Thanks, everyone.